Hey guys, in this video, we're going to be talking about runes for the Death Knight. First thing we're going to talk about is the basics of how runes work. Then we're going to talk about how you can plan around your diseases and your rotational cooldowns like Death and Decay. Plan them around your runes. And we're also going to talk about Rune Grace, which is a mechanic a lot of people don't know about. And it's really important when it comes to playing your Death Knight properly. We're going to wrap it up by talking about Blood Tap, how to use it, how Blood Tap works, another misused ability commonly, and then we'll lastly talk about Death Runes in general. So let's get started. So first up, what are your runes? We got our Blood Runes, our Frost Runes, our Unholy Runes. And when we're using our abilities, they typically either cost runes and then give us runic power, or they're going to uh, you know, cost runic power. Of course, there's some exceptions like your Death Grip and stuff, but most moves are going to be either consuming runes, generating runic power, or spending runic power. When it comes to the runes, they refresh every 10 seconds, and they are, it's good to just use them regularly. The faster you use them, the faster they come back off cooldown. So it's a good practice to just use them as soon as they come up. Kind of like whack-a-mole. You're just going to hit the ability that corresponds to the rune that is currently available. Of course, if you're not paying attention to your runes, you can look at your action bar and it'll show you how those abilities are coming up. But to be honest, you can just look at your runes and you don't even have to look at your action bar. And you should know or get used to what abilities you're able to press based on your just looking at the runes themselves. And then obviously because it's a pattern, right? Your runes are a set, timer that they're coming back. You can get in the feel of things, and sometimes you don't even have to look too closely at what is going on with your runes. You just kind of memorize a rotation or a pattern. So that's the basics. We're gonna play whack-a-mole. We're gonna press our runes. Now, how can we take it to the next level? How can we, for example, keep up our diseases efficiently? Right? So let's say we are playing Unholy here, and we've got some diseases up. Now, am I safe to Scourge Strike here? And the answer is yes, because I had another set of runes that was going to come up before my diseases fell. And I think the best way to remember it in your head is, when was the last time you spent runes? And how much time was left on your diseases? So what I like to do is look at the duration of the diseases, and I say, okay, I just reapplied these diseases. They're going to be there for 15 seconds because I'm not playing a talent. Now let's say I'm about to Scourge Strike here, 9 and 8 seconds. Okay, so that means I can Scourge Strike again, and next time my runes are up, my diseases would have just fallen off, right? So I refresh them right as they fall off, and we're doing good. Now, of course, if you're keeping your diseases up with Pestilence, you need to make sure you're refreshing them before they fall off. But there again, I was checking if I could use my Unholy and my Frost rune on a Scourge Strike, and I just saw the time I had left on my diseases, and I knew I was safe to spend them. Same thing again here. I'm good to spend on another Frost and Unholy rune, and I know that next time my runes come up, I can go ahead and refresh my diseases. So that is kind of the basics of keeping up your diseases. Just that your runes are going to refresh every 10 seconds, so just keep an eye on how much time left on your diseases when you are committing your rune that you need to refresh it. So obviously, everything I just said was about refreshing them with Frost or Icy Touch and Plague Strike. But if you're using Pestilence with Glyph of Disease, you're just going to watch your Blood rune and make sure that one's ready. Gonna have a Blood rune ready before your diseases fall off. All right, next we're going to talk about Death and Decay. So Death and Decay is an ability that is commonly misused in trash packs and stuff. I would say it's really, really important to use Death and Decay properly if you want to do as much damage as possible in these big packs. And the biggest thing is people don't cast it the second time fast enough, especially if they're playing Morbidity. So this is what I'd say a typical player does. They're going to drop their Death and Decay. Maybe they're going to spread some diseases, kind of do their thing. Then they're going to get a next set of runes around. Maybe they spend a couple of them, maybe refresh, spread some diseases, and our Death and Decay is ready to use, but we have no runes. And so maybe we'll Death and Decay, like 5 seconds late, 6 seconds late. Well, if Death and Decay is your highest damaging ability, you really want to be using it as much as possible. And so every time you press Death and Decay, especially with that Morbidity talent, you want to almost be tracking in your head, okay, how many runes am I allowed to use before before my Death and Decay comes back up? So this is how you want to do it instead. You drop your Death and Decay. You can still do the same thing, spread your diseases. But now this next time our runes come back up, I need to know, all right, I have 3 runes I can use, 1 of each type, right? I can use 3 runes, but then I'm going to stop. I'm going to let all the runes come back, and then I'm going to Death and Decay, right? And if you spend more than 1 of each rune, you're obviously not going to have enough for your Death and Decay, and you're going to clip into its cooldown. You're not going to keep it up the whole time. So that's just a basic thing that a lot of players just do not think about. Similar stuff applies to Howling Blast as you're getting better at Frost. Of course, if you just keep spending individual Frost or Unholy runes, you're going to keep pushing back Howling Blast and not use it off cooldown, which is not good, right? You're going to lose damage. So that is the basics there. Now we're going to start getting to some more advanced stuff. Now we're going to talk about Rune Grace. So Rune Grace is a mechanic that is the goal is for you to feel like you don't have to press every rune the exact second it comes off cooldown, right? And so what Rune Grace does is there is a grace period after you use your runes and or after they come off cooldown where they are going to have a shortened cooldown if you use them within the grace window. So there is a 2.5 second grace window. And what that basically means is you don't have to press your button the second the rune is ready. And in fact, you could use something like a death coil, even as a rune is coming up. And as long as you use that rune within 2.5 seconds of it being ready, you don't lose any damage, right? So at the start of a fight, you're going to see all of my runes have a 10-second cooldown. If we're looking over by my frame, they're all going to say 10 seconds. And the second time I use my abilities, if I wait 2.5 seconds, now my Icy Touch says 7. Now my Frost rune says 8, and then 7, and then these Unholy runes are going to say 7. Blood runes, because it's because 2.5 seconds is being subtracted from the cooldown of the rune, because we have stayed in combat, right? As long as you maintain in combat, every time you use a rune, it is going to have that shortened cooldown to make up for how long it's been since you've used the rune. So all this means is that if your runes are about to come off cooldown, you are safe to spend runic power. You don't have to sit there mashing your rune, waiting for it to come off cooldown, afraid that you are going to lose your, not be resetting your runes fast enough here. My blood rune's about to be ready, but I can actually go ahead and throw out a coil, and it's no problem. The other useful application when it comes to Rune Grace is knowing that you do not have to refresh your diseases early if you have extra time for your Rune Grace, right? So for example, if in this case, I think this is going to be a good example, my runes are up to refresh my diseases, but I can throw a coil instead if I want, or I could have used a blood rune and delay refreshing my diseases 1.5 seconds, and it's not actually going to cost me damage because my runes are going to be back up using Rune Grace because they had just come up. So long story short, I know it's complicated, but the long and the short of it is you have a 2.5 second window after your rune is ready, and you need to use it in that 2.5 seconds or you're going to be wasting your runes. But as long as you use it within that buffer, the cooldown is going to be reduced. So if you use your rune 1 second after the rune comes off cooldown, it'll have a 9-second cooldown, and then obviously all the way to 2.5 seconds. If you use your rune 4 seconds late, it is going to still have the 7.5 second cooldown. And of course, the Rune Grace resets every time you exit combat. And the only way to reactivate it is to get every single rune on cooldown. And your Rune Grace won't apply until your runes come back at least once. Okay, so that's Rune Grace. On to Blood Tap. So Blood Tap is going to refresh a blood rune and convert your leftmost blood rune into a death rune. probably most commonly misused way with blood tap is a lot of people use blood tap when they're ready for the extra rune. But if you know in advance that you're going to need the rune, you can actually be a little bit more efficient and blood tap early. So what do I mean by that? If I show you here, if I use a blood rune, and let's say I put 2 blood runes on cooldown, obviously the best time to refresh a rune would be right after it's used. But if I press blood tap here, you're going to see that it converted my leftmost blood rune to a death rune, even though that rune was about to come off cooldown. And so if you're trying to get the most value out of refreshing a blood rune, you're going to want to use it right after your leftmost blood rune has been put on cooldown. Now, there is there is a way around this. It's a little complicated, of course, but if your leftmost blood rune is ready and your right blood rune, so right here, if I would have blood tapped right now, it would have refreshed the 9 seconds on my blood rune and given my leftmost blood rune a death rune. But that's just a little harder to keep track of in the heat of battle. But the goal is you want to typically just use your blood tap after your leftmost blood rune. So to show you what it would look like, right, you are going to, even if you use Death and Decay, even if you do some sort of AoE opener, you immediately blood tap and you reset the full duration of your rune. So that's how you get a little bit more value out of the blood tap. It's important to know which rune's being reset and obviously how to get the most value out of it. Now, it's going to convert your rune to a death rune for 20 seconds. So you can obviously use one of any type of ability that consumes the runes. However, even though it is 20 seconds, you cannot use that blood rune 3 times. You can only use it twice. Right away when you use it, and then obviously the second time it refreshes, you can use it one more time. But because it's a 20-second cooldown, and because you can't macro blood tap into an ability that immediately consumes the rune, because it takes time for the rune to refresh in the game, you cannot get 3 uses out of that death rune. Okay, last thing we'll talk about is, I guess, death runes in general. And to do that, I will go over to blood. So obviously, death runes are runes that can be used for any type of ability. Let's generate some runes here. So now we have 4 death runes, and I'll show you kind of some mechanics of how the death runes work. So I'm going to blood tap here, so we're going to have 5 death runes, and then I'm going to icy touch. And you're going to see that it prioritizes the original runes that were frost first. Now, if I use the blood ability, it's going to prioritize the blood rune over the other rune. And if I icy touch again, it's going to prioritize frost runes over death runes. And that's just how it works. When you use death runes, it's always going to prioritize the normal runes if they're available when you use a move. And then it is going to try and use the death rune of the slot of your normal rune that you're trying to use. So there is a mechanic to how that is used. Now, when it comes to your death runes and how you want to use them, typically your spec is going to have your highest damaging moves or your most efficient move to press. So in this case, we are a blood spec. And so if you're playing blood, the best thing you can do with your runes is icy touch for a threat. So here in this example, I've got a death rune, right? The best thing I can do is either icy touch 3 times or icy touch twice. And then because I'm able to convert frost and unholy runes to death runes, I can make more death runes for later. But what you don't want to do is waste your death rune on something that is not as good, like my blood runes. So for example, if I were to throw out some blood strikes recklessly and then try and refresh or use pestilence, I would have actually wasted one of my death runes on a blood ability. And that would be really inefficient because, blood runes are my worst rune. So I want to try and make sure that whenever I'm using a death rune, I'm using it on the best type of ability. So it's kind of simple, it's kind of obvious, but obviously when it comes to spending the death runes, you want to make sure that here in the case, if I have 4 death runes, I can launch off 4 icy touches if I want, and that would be really good. and it would be kind of wasteful to use them on blood runes or to use them on plague strikes, because those are not the powerful abilities that my character is using, at least as blood. So hopefully that helps when it comes to your Death Knight. Let me know if you guys have any questions about Rune Grace or have any questions about Blood Tap and how it works. Hopefully this will help you, master the Blood Knight runes. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow my Twitch in the description. And I will see you guys next time.